Thank you all for coming. We're now about to enjoy an absolutely remarkable panel that I'm going to introduce to you. Lester Brown, Dr. David Orr, Randy Hayes, Chuck Kutscher, and Betsy Taylor will be explaining to you why we need to take such action. So the warmer you get, the more motivated I think you'll be to hear what they have to say. Thank you. Good to see you, guys.
Yeah, it sounds good. I think do we need one more chair up here? Yeah. There's my Ah.
Everybody checking their cell phones.
I think you're live.
Tell you what, I can stick it back up.
Welcome. Working. Welcome to the Big Tent. I want to thank the Alliance for, let me try this. Welcome. Is this working?
Is it clicked on? Is it on?
Should have been on, it was supposed to be on before. Is that better? Okay, thank you. It's always good to have an engineer in the crowd. Welcome to the Big Tent. Let me thank first the Alliance for Sustainable Colorado, for organizing and hosting this event. I think the idea of having this at the time of the Democratic National Convention is a great idea. In case you're not aware of it, the media coverage of this convention, the Democratic National Convention, will undoubtedly be the largest of any political event in history. I mean, it's extraordinary, the worldwide interest in this convention. As I've traveled around the world, I had the feeling if Barack Obama was running for president of almost any country in Europe, he would have won going away. I mean, he really has focused the world's attention on the United States, I think partly because he represents what the world wants this country to be. And so we have an enormous interest. I am first going to introduce my fellow panelists. Then I will spend 20 minutes looking at the big picture. And then I'm going to turn to Betsy Taylor to moderate the discussion following that. First, Randy Hayes on my left, a hero, a visionary, founder of the Rainforest Action Network, and he's now the climate point person at the World Future Council, which is dealing with climate change at the global level. David Orr on the faculty at Oberlin. David, at a dinner in Aspen Saturday night, your name came up as one of those environmentalists who knows the issues and can communicate them. And I think you represent that very well. Chuck Kutscher, hometown, working at NREL, the National Renewable Energy Lab, has worked on renewable energy for many years, is currently working on solar thermal energy, which is also called concentrated solar power, and is on the cutting edge of this. His thinking has recently been packaged along with that with a number of other leading experts in tackling climate change in the U.S., potential carbon emissions reductions from energy efficiency, and renewable energy by 2030. Are you hearing in the back? Can't hear?
Yeah, they can hear.
Can't hear? Okay. On my right is Betsy Taylor. Betsy has been the visual manifestation of the Center for the New American Dream for many, many years. We had lunch the other day in Washington, and the building in which I am now officed is one where you were, Betsy, dare I say, 35 years ago? In the early days. But all the members of this panel have one thing in common, and that is a sense of urgency concerning climate change and the need to cut carbon emissions and cut them fast. And with Betsy, that's taken the form of creating an organization last year called One Sky, which is designed and is organizing, mobilizing support for moving very fast to cut carbon emissions. Last summer, as we were working, coming down the home stretch on Plan B 3.0, mobilizing to save civilization, which is what I will be drawing from in the next 20 minutes, there was a flurry of reports on ice melting. One from scientists monitoring the melting of the ice in the Arctic Sea, pointing out that within a period of 1 week, an area the size of Great Britain had disappeared, an area of sea ice. They'd not seen anything like that before, and that was just one example of the accelerated ice melting that's leading scientists to project a much earlier date for an ice-free Arctic Sea in the summertime. Then there was this extraordinary report from Greenland about one of the large glacial outflows flowing not at 100 meters a year or 200 meters a year, which is typical of glaciers. This glacier is flowing at 2 meters an hour. I mean, literally, one could see it moving. Scientists have not seen anything like that before. And it's led to some mounting concern about the future of the Greenland ice sheet. If that ice sheet goes, sea level rises 23 feet. And we would have a total relocation of world population, since such a large share of humanity lives very close to the ocean and very close to sea level. I could go on about the melting of the glaciers in Asia and the effect on the river flows during the dry season, and that becomes a massive food security issue for countries like India and China. But one doesn't really have to go beyond ice melting to see that we're in trouble as a civilization. And that's one of the sources of the urgency that we have. In Plan B 3.0, one of the 4 principal components is a plan to cut carbon emissions 80% by 2020. It is common now for political leaders to talk about cutting carbon emissions 80% by 2050. That's a very comfortable date because few of the people in office today will be in office then. But Political leaders usually ask the question, what is politically feasible in terms of cutting carbon emissions? We asked another question, which was how fast do we have to cut carbon emissions if we want to save the Greenland ice sheet, or if we want to save the glaciers in the Himalayas and on the Tibetan Plateau that sustain the major rivers of Asia during the dry season. When you ask that question, you get a different answer. And what we've concluded is that we have to cut carbon emissions by 2020, over the next dozen years. Cutting carbon emissions for us has three components. Automatically raising the efficiency of the world energy economy. The second is harnessing renewable energy resources on a massive scale. And the third is banning deforestation and planting billions of trees to sequester carbon. These are the three major components. Let me just use one simple example to illustrate the efficiency potential. If we were to move to the most efficient lighting technologies now available, which is basically fluorescent bulbs for the world, we could reduce world electricity demand by 12%. That would enable us to close 705 of the nearly 2,400 coal-fired power plants in the world today, just by changing light bulbs and actually saving money in the process. We look at renewable energy, and whereas today 40% of our electricity comes from coal, in the new energy economy, the Plan B energy economy for 2020, we see 40% of the world's electricity coming from wind. That would require building roughly 1.5 million wind turbines, 2 megawatts each, 3 million megawatts of generating capacity. Now, 1.5 million wind turbines sounds like a lot, but we make 65 million cars a year. And we're talking about 1.5 million wind turbines over the next dozen years. We could produce those wind turbines just by using idle U.S. automobile assembly plants in the United States, do it for the entire world and create hundreds of thousands of jobs in the process. In the United States, one of the most interesting developments in the wind area is in Texas. For the last century, Texas has been the leading source of oil in the United States. It is now the leading source of wind-generated electricity. But it's only getting started. There are now at least 5,000 megawatts of wind-generating capacity in Texas. They have plans with building 2 new transmission lines, one from West Texas, one from the Texas Panhandle, to push that to 23,000 megawatts. But there are other developments in Texas, including a 1,200 megawatt development on the coast near Corpus Christi. But altogether, there are now in development, under construction, in development, in operation in Texas, a total of 45,000 megawatts of wind-generated electricity, enough to satisfy the residential needs of 24 million people who live in Texas. I use Texas as an example because we don't think of Texas as being on the cutting edge of these things, but it makes eminent economic sense. The reason Boone Pickens is investing in wind energy today is because he expects to make money. He's not an ardent environmentalist. He expects to earn 15 to 25% a year on his $10 billion investment in a 4,000 megawatt wind farm in the Texas Panhandle. He was asked by a journalist, why are you, an oil man for 60 years, suddenly investing all this money in wind energy? And he said very simply, I've gotten tired of oil depletion curves. And what he was acknowledging was that when you invest in a new oil field, you know it's going to last for some decades, and it's pretty well gone. Or a new coal mine, and the seams run out. But when you invest in wind farms and the transmission infrastructure, you're investing in an energy system that can last as long as the sun. I mean, obviously you have to replace the bearings and there's a certain amount of maintenance over time, but this is the first time since the Industrial Revolution began that we can invest in an energy system that will basically last forever. That's an exciting possibility. And I think it's going to drive things more and more as we realize what the potential is. I could talk about other states in the United States. There are 31 states. I didn't start to 8 after, so I've still got some minutes to go. Thanks. There are 31 states that have commercial scale wind farms. Some of the big new ones are South Dakota, 5,000 megawatts. I mean, far more than South Dakota could ever use. It's going to be exported, transmitted into the industrial heartland in the Midwest. State of Delaware, offshore wind farm, 600 megawatts, probably satisfy a third of Delaware's residential electricity needs. And I could go on. Turkey has proposals to develop 78,000 megawatts of wind farms. These were invited by the government. Current generating capacity in Turkey is just over 30,000 megawatts total. All sources. They'll probably end up developing maybe 15,000 out of these 78,000 proposals. But I mention this just to give a sense of what's happening in various places in the world. We all know about Europe and Germany and Denmark and so forth. China, starting very late, but now moving fast, has doubled its electricity generation from wind in each of the last 3 years, and now has 4 different wind farm clusters in the development stage of 10,000 megawatts each. Enormous. One of the questions that people ask when we talk about cutting global carbon emissions 80% by 2020 is, what about cars in the United States? And that's a good question. We consume more gasoline than the next 20 countries combined. The answer is plug-in hybrids. Plug-in hybrids. 5 companies coming to market. Probably the first 2 will be either our Toyota and GM, not later than 2010. Toyota may be next year with a modified version of the Prius. But with plug-in hybrids, we can then run our cars largely on wind energy, on electricity, and specifically on wind-generated electricity at a cost of less than $1 per gallon equivalent of gasoline. Extraordinarily exciting. Solar energy, solar cells, doubling in sales every 2 years. Solar thermal energy, which is what Chuck has been working on. In Algeria, they are planning to develop 6,000 megawatts of solar thermal generating capacity. These are the mirrors concentrating sunlight on a vessel that contains water or some other liquid to generate steam and produce electricity. Their reason for doing this is to export the electricity to Europe. They know their oil exports are not going to last much longer. They want to keep exporting electricity, 6,000 megawatts, and they point out that they have enough solar energy in their desert, which is most of the country, to power the world economy. I mention that just to give a sense of how much renewable energy there is out there. As everyone knows, 3 states in this country have enough harnessable wind energy, North Dakota, Kansas, and Texas, to satisfy U.S. electricity needs. These are vast resources. They're not trivial and they're not marginal. I could talk about geothermal. In the U.S. today, there are 94 projects in the western U.S. in developing solar thermal power plants. Some small, 10 megawatts, some large, 100 or 200 megawatts. Indonesia is now planning to develop 6,800 megawatts of wind generating capacity, enough to satisfy probably a quarter of their electricity needs from geothermal energy. One of the big questions is the grid. How do we get the grids? And what we're beginning to see is, instead of seeing grids, the need for grids as an obstacle to see the need for grids as an investment opportunity. The most dramatic example of this right now is in Scotland, where the Scottish government is negotiating with two investment funds from Dubai to invest $7 billion in wind transmission infrastructure so the Scots can harness 65,000 megawatts of offshore energy, mostly wind energy, to export to Europe. To put that in perspective, UK total generating capacity today, all sources, is less than 100,000 megawatts. So we're seeing some quantum jumps in thinking. We're moving beyond the marginal, incremental thinking of the past. Final point, we're in a race between tipping points, between natural tipping points and political tipping points. Can we phase out coal-fired power plants fast enough to save the Greenland ice? Can we cut carbon emissions fast enough to save the glaciers in the mountains of Asia that sustain the major rivers there during the dry season? One of the most exciting things happening in this country right now is I think we've reached a tipping point on coal-fired power plants. And as many of you know, there's a powerful grassroots movement now opposing the construction of any new coal-fired power plants in the U.S. Final point, people often say, is there hope? Can we do it? I think we can. And I go back to the economic history of World War II, when after Pearl Harbor, a month later, January 6, 1942, President Roosevelt gave the State of the Union address in which he laid out the arms production goals. He said, we're going to produce 40,000 tanks, 60,000 planes, 20,000 artillery guns, 7,000 ships. No one had ever seen numbers like this before. But what they didn't realize was what Roosevelt was planning to do, because after he made that speech, he called in the leaders of the automobile industry, because at that time the largest concentration of industrial power in the world was in the U.S. automobile industry. So he called in the leaders and said, because you guys represent such a large share of our industrial capacity, we're going to rely heavily on you to reach these arms production goals. They said, well, Mr. President, we're going to do everything, but it's going to be a stretch producing cars and all these arms too. He said, you don't understand. We're going to ban the sale of private automobiles in the United States. And that's exactly what happened. From the beginning of April 1942 to the end of 1944, there were essentially no automobiles produced in the United States. We exceeded every one of those arms production goals. It did not take decades to restructure the U.S. industrial economy. It did not take years. We did it in a matter of months. The challenge now, Betsy will talk about this, is we've all got to become politically active. We used to talk about saving the planet. What we're talking about now is saving civilization itself. And that means every one of us has to become engaged, not just in political campaigns, but in environmental issues like banning coal-fired power plants or using taxpayer money to buy bottled water, for example. I mean, there are a whole list of things that we can work on, but we all have to be involved. Saving civilization is not a spectator sport.
Thank you so much, Lester. I don't know if this is not on, right? Can you hear me? You can hear me. It's not very loud. In the back, can you hear me? Sort of. All right. Well, just a few minutes before coming out here, we sort of switched, and we decided I would moderate. And I just want to say a couple weeks ago. I said, so how are you doing? And he said, I'm just wondering if we're going to pull this off in time. I'm just wondering if we've got the tipping point happening, things are going down so, the ice melt. At the same time, there's this rising up of the human spirit right now. And he says, I'm just holding that. So in this next part of our session, we're going to ask each of the panelists. I'll try to, can you hear me? I'm not sure where to put the mic. How about now? Is that about right? All right. I'm going to have each one of the panelists, including myself, say just a few minutes about how we're seeing the challenge that we're really facing here. And then what is truly exciting us. You're not hearing me, are you? I can't talk loud. You can try it that way.
Betsy, I think I've got a mic that works.
Can you get it off?
Is that better? Can you hear me now? Okay? All right. So we're going to go to each person. I just want to say for myself, it's very exciting to be here. We know history is really being made this week. No matter what happens in November, history's already being made. And it's so exciting to be here. But in the middle of that, in the rush of all the parties and all the events here in Denver, and in the rush of the work we do back home every day, it's really important to remember, as we've heard from Lester, these are not normal times. These are drastic times. There is a threat and it is imminent. It is not distant. And really we are being asked to try to change the course of history together. And it's not on this stage because every person on this stage, and I know many of you in the audience, are part of changing history. So I want to start, again, asking each person to speak briefly to the challenges they see it as we take on climate solutions, and then to a solution or two that's really getting them excited. And I'll speak. Can you hear me? I feel like it's going off and on. Is it my voice?
Just hold that like a mic.
Oh, I'll hold it like a mic. Okay. All right. Okay. So thanks a lot, Randy. Randy's one of my heroes. So I'd like to start with Chuck down at the end there. Chuck Kutscher, who you've already been introduced. I won't reintroduce everyone, but Chuck is really the climate scientist on this panel and will speak both to the threat as well as to some of the very exciting technologies that he's part of helping deploy in the world.
Okay. Thanks, Betsy. Can you hear me in the back?
Maybe
can't.
just hold it like a mic.
Try this. How's that? Okay? All right. Thank you, Betsy. I just want to start by reinforcing what Lester said, namely that climate change is an incredibly urgent problem. You know, not far from here, up in Boulder, at the National Snow and Ice Data Center, they take data on the extent of Arctic sea ice, and they've seen it declining every year. And about every September, it reaches its minimum, its summer minimum. And last September 16th, it hit a new record minimum that was 22% below the previous record. They were just astonished by this. It was off the charts. It now looks like the Earth could be free of summer Arctic sea ice in 5 to 10 years, within our lifetimes. Now, as far as we know, this has not happened in 130,000 years. So this is something human beings have never experienced before. So this is far beyond the realm of any natural variation. Our leading climate scientist, Jim Hansen, who's head of the NASA's Goddard Institute for Space Studies in New York, came out with a paper recently, and he said we need to actually get below where we are now in terms of CO2 content in the atmosphere. You know, for about 1 million years, it's varied between about 180 and 300 parts per million. We're at 387 right now, going up at 2 parts per million per year. We're way beyond what it's ever been before. And a lot of scientists have said, well, you know, we better level out at 450. Well, Hansen looks at the climate data. He looks at what's happened on the planet in the past, and he concluded in this recent paper that 450 is not good enough. We need to get it back below 350. We're at 387 right now. Now, Now let me ask you this. Imagine if you were driving along in your car and you had a gauge in your car and it was reading in the red region. How long would you feel comfortable driving down the highway with that gauge reading? That's where we are right now at the planet. So we've known about climate change for decades. Because we haven't done anything about it, it has now reached crisis proportions, which means we have to drastically reduce carbon emissions as rapidly as possible. Now, there are various technologies out there that can be used, but if you look at the ones that can be deployed today, they're the ones that Lester was talking about. Number one, efficiency. We did a study for the American Solar Energy Society. Lester was nice enough to hold up the book. You can get it on the web, www.ases.org. It stands for American Solar Energy Society. It's called Tackling Climate Change in the U.S. We asked experts what could be accomplished. Basically, energy efficiency could reduce our emissions about 57%. That's enough to essentially levelize out U.S. carbon emissions. That's not good enough. We need to make cuts, but we can level them out with efficiency and then apply these various renewable sources that Lester referred to. He talked about wind technology. You know, the good thing is that these things are already starting to take place. Here in Colorado last year, we passed 1,000 megawatts. Now, the peak summer load in Colorado is about 11,000 megawatts. So 1,000 megawatts of wind, that's not chump change. That's significant. In the U.S., last year, we passed 20,000 megawatts of wind. These technologies are taking off. Contrary to hurting the economy, they're helping the economy. Ranchers and farmers are tripping over each other to get wind turbines put on their land so they can make $5,000 to $7,000 a year on those turbines. So this is something that makes economic sense. Lester also mentioned concentrating solar power. You know, one of the things you hear about renewables is, well, you know, they're intermittent, you can't count on them. Well, with concentrating solar power located in the desert Southwest, we can put in extra large collector fields. We can store that heat and use it in the evening hours to boil more water, produce more steam, generate electricity. That's why Arizona Public Service recently looked at all the different options they had available to meet the growing demand they have in Phoenix. And they opted to buy a 280 megawatt concentrating solar power plant with 6 hours of storage. So these technologies are here now. We can them at an even faster rate. In fact, we need to, but we do have the solutions. It's just a matter of coming up with the political will to get those technologies out there even faster. Thanks.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. Big round of applause here for Chuck Kutscher. David Orr is next, and if you don't know David Orr, please check out his bio on the web at the Big Tent. He is one of the magnificent leaders, like Chuck, a visionary and author who has based at Oberlin and has done way ahead of everybody else in terms of moving green campuses, and now he's trying to transform not only the town of Oberlin, but the state of Ohio. David?
Betsy, thanks. Can you all hear me back in the back? Pick up where Chuck left off. I'm going to go back 40 years. It was about the time the first book of Lester's that I read, and I believe it's World Without Borders. Is that right, Lester? It was a period of time in 1968, around 1973 or 74, we passed the major environmental legislation for this country. It's still the framework law. And that included the National Policy Act, Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, the Wilderness Act, Endangered Species Act, and so forth. Now, we did not know at that time how bad things were. Climate change was not really on the radar screen except for a few very prescient scientists like George Woodwell. But we came together, left and right, around the issues of clean air, clean water, biological preservation, and so forth. Run the film forward, 40 years later. We've had the greatest political failure in human history. It's not first and foremost an economic failure. It's not, as Lester described and as Chuck described, it isn't a technological failure, it is a political failure. And now we're at the Democratic Convention. We'll be at the Republican Convention in a few weeks. But this is a political issue first and foremost. And I want to make 2 points about this. Pardon my voice. I've got, my granddaughter said I talk too much, but I've got a little bit of laryngitis, but I'm going to suffer through it. You're going to have to suffer with me. Do you remember George Orwell wrote Animal Farm? George Orwell once said, you don't begin by corrupting a nation by taking over its finances or anything else. You corrupt its language first and foremost. So I made a list on the airplane flying out this morning of things that I think have gotten corrupted, that are words we use all the time, but whose meaning has been displaced. Take the word conservative. Under the word conservative, we've justified, or some people have justified, taking no action on the largest issue we've ever had on the human agenda except for nuclear war. And what passes for prudent policy has been for the last 8 years merely reckless. How did the word conservative, a good word, get corrupted? Off for a couple minutes. Wait, they're back up. Can you hear this again? All right, I'm talking about language and the corruption of languages in history regarding climatic change. How did the word pro-life, or the words pro-life, get adopted to oppose gun control, which is all about saving lives, or the death penalty? Does language get corrupted? Fiscal conservatism. The U.S. Congressional Budget Office, the total national debt, give you in a room, at something like $40 to $45 trillion now. How did the phrase support our troops come to mean putting them where they don't belong? And how did fair and balanced get corrupted? It used to be a perfectly good phrase in the language news. And then this phrase global, it isn't global warming. As Lester described, this is planetary destabilization. And it's already begun. And the question now is, in the race that both Betsy and Lester and Chuck referred to, is how do we arrest this before some days in Ohio? This is very destabilization, political systems, and biophysical systems. The problem we have is the largest political failure in history. We're at one of our two national parties. This has got, however, to trans-party affiliation. You cannot be just a Democratic issue. It can't be an issue. This has to be an issue where we come together, left and right, liberal and conservative. This is an issue that clearly transcends all other issues, party affiliation. This issue cannot be another item on a long list of issues that confront this nation, well described. It's got to be seen as the linchpin together. This is an issue that, oh yeah, we'll solve all these others. And then finally, let me say two last. A BBC poll taken last fall showed that of 6 or 7 states was ready to work on this issue, even to the point of sacrificing the big S word, but they sacrifice. And now we need together, even when it may not be in our market self-interest, because the last thing I'd like to say is that in the little town of Oberlin, we're moving to aim to become carbon neutral. We're finding that's kind of tricky, but it needs to bring ourselves together. This is in every way to come together. This issue, it's in our national interest, and it sure is in the interest of now in dire jeopardy of the Fifth Amendment and the 14th Amendment. We have every reason to act. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. Next is Randy Hayes, president of the
Work at the Rainforest Action Network is a tool to orchestrate this kind of social change. We've seen in the past that that's been necessary in the civil rights movement and many other movements. Blockading the front doors of the world, or Citibank or Burger King or Home Depot develop the right kind of policies necessary to society. Back to the room, I see a few people here that I go with, you know. Wow, but hey, the day's young, you know, maybe we could do something together. It also takes me out into the rainforest, over in Southeast Asia, and in Congo rainforest, and down into the Amazon itself. I was meeting tribes down there, one in particular. As Chuck was telling me earlier, of Alaska, right? If they do that with an Alaska type environment with just solar, think of what we could do here in North America, in Mexico, United States, and Canada. And our continent's got to rise to the occasion and help get this job done. So what we need the presidential candidates to know here at the Democratic Convention in particular, we need to let Obama and his team know, is that there's a model with a policy out there, the German renewable energy law called the feed-in tariff law, that has proven that they can deliver more megawatts to the grid more quickly in a more equitable way and by allowing lapdogs of big industry. Exxon is not going to allow us. We need to put power literally in the hands of the people and turn ourselves, as I mentioned, from the nation of consumers into the nation of producers. The German law has allowed everyone's participation, from homeowners to farmers to small business owners. And in the interest of time, I won't go into the mechanics of that law too much, but if you just Google the phrase feed-in tariff, what that means is you're feeding electricity into the grid at a high rate of return. You get paid a decent rate of return. Wouldn't it be nice if you put solar panels on your house that you get a check in the mail? You know? Shouldn't farmers in Germany now have a new revenue center? They've got these big barn roofs saturated with solar power, and they get a check in the mail every month. That's how the system works. So we can turn this crisis opportunity into that great ecological U-turn. And I will just say that there are 4 main components to this German renewable energy law, and that's that anybody who wants to put electricity into the grid, you're guaranteed access. Utility companies can't cut you out, right? And that they pay you a good rate of return, and that it's a long-term program. It's a 20-year program. That allows you to go out if you need to get a loan for $40,000 or $400,000 to build, a wind machine or a solar unit to put up. That you can do that. You can finance the operation, and the program phases out over 20 years because we think we won't need it that long, right? So it's not a long-term government regulation program. It's a short-term boost to the economy to allow us to generate jobs and local economic development. They've generated over 250,000 jobs in Germany in the last few years. That's the real stuff of green-collar jobs. And again, that's with a climate like Alaska. We can do it here at a bigger scale, and we need to, and with your help we will. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Randy. Can you hear me? So I'm Betsy Taylor. I'm president of the board of the One Sky campaign. Are you hearing me? Yeah, okay. I asked everyone to say, what is your biggest, how do you see the challenge? And I'm not going to speak to the Arctic sea ice, although I think about it a lot. I think the biggest challenge is going back to what David Orr said. Are we going to have the biggest political failure in the history of the world? I have a nephew sitting out here who's just had a new baby. Van Jones was up here a little while ago. His baby's 13 days old. Are we going to find the best of ourselves and get out of business as usual and actually create a human wave that knocks down the doors of Congress and knocks down the doors of the White House? Or are we going to, do a little bit? Are we going to just believe our rhetoric, do a little bit? I remember my biggest fear is that somehow we will do what happened during the Clinton-Gore era. Scary that I am old enough to remember very much how those days felt. There was a lot of hope that we'd have a BTU tax. There was a President's Council on Sustainable Development. There was going to be a whole restructuring of the economy. Nothing happened, really, because we didn't do the political homework we need. So what I want to share with you is that I think that there is not only the potential, but there is the beginning of a stomping around the country of people signing up to say, I'm going to take leave of my job for a while. Students who are taking off this fall to work. People who have never before talked to a member of Congress who are going in waves, doctors, farmers, students. And this is what's exciting me. And I'll speak just briefly to a campaign I'm involved with called the One Sky campaign. There's so many groups all over the country doing fabulous work to try to push the solutions that have been talked about here. But it's not adding up yet. It's just not adding up. And the One Sky campaign is an effort to we've now brought together over 100 organizations who are unified around a bold platform for change. And our sole mission is to make sure that we pass comprehensive federal policy on climate, green energy, green jobs that will actually get this job done. That we no longer just talk about what's politically possible, but we do what's scientifically necessary. And I can tell you right now, in August, in when we put out an alert, we wanted people to go and speak with their members of Congress about this during the August recess. Within 24 hours, 1,700 people had booked meetings, had promised to book meetings with their members of Congress. It's old-fashioned. It's old-fashioned politics. We're also working to take actions with others. Green for All and One Sky will be posting actions around the country in late September, not on the scary part, but on the promise of what green communities and green jobs can actually do. It's right there. It's right within our grasp. We can turn away from fossil fuel, but it is political, and still there is the danger that in the excitement around the new leadership, frankly, in both parties, so much better than what we've had for the last many years, that in that excitement we'll underestimate the hard work we need to all do together to build the political power. So I just want to end by saying, I think I'm getting the time card on the whole session. So I want to end by saying, I invite you all to, if you aren't yet kind of taking this into your heart and soul, if you aren't yet feeling like you're taking risks, including sometimes that might be criticizing the Obama campaign. Maybe it's not quite there yet. Now's the time to speak the truth and to bring new people into the political process. We'll only do this from the bottom up. We'll only do this if people well beyond Denver right now are getting on the phone, they're calling their member of Congress and they're saying, I want to talk because I'm worried about my kids, because I love this place and I am going to put myself on the line. That is what we need. That's what everybody on this panel has been doing, and that's what we need every American to do. I urge you to go to onesky.org. We are trying to get volunteer leaders in every precinct in the country who will then reach out and help us create this wave. I hope you'll sign up. And on behalf of the Big Tent, on behalf of the great sponsors of this event, the Alliance for Sustainable Colorado, which stuck its neck out, by the way, and is still down $200,000 for organizing this, please contribute. The Daily Coast, Progress Now, thank you so much for giving us this opportunity. No time for questions, right? All right, we're going on to the next session, I guess. Oh, I see one question. Let's just break the rules. That's what we're doing now. One question. And we're going to have to make this real fast because I'm definitely getting the axe.
Just a word. We don't have another hour, but I'll tell you, money is a big part of it. And the money in politics and media centralization. Two things. Thanks for the question.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Hey, nice job.
Oh, you guys are
You got money.